When it comes to chess improvement, climbing up from the rating of 1400 to 1800 ELO is quite the task, but don't worry, in this video I'm going to be giving you a study plan to do just that, to achieve all your hopes and dreams and become everything you wanted to be and more. Well, maybe not everything and maybe not all the hopes and dreams, but at least some chess-related ones. This is part of an ongoing series where I break down chess study plans for different rating ranges, giving you things that you should focus on at that particular playing strength. And all of these videos are influenced by articles on chess.com written by titled players, and I'll link them in the description. I highly recommend you read through them and check them out. They've got some great insights and links that I won't be including here, but I'll be summarizing those articles and giving you my perspective from a player who is around 1800 ELO on chess.com. A little bit about me, just so you have an idea of who's spieling at you through the camera here, but my name is Stanley. I've been playing chess since I was around 7 years old. I started taking it more seriously a few years back when the Queen's Gambit came out and everyone started getting into chess all of a sudden, and I created this YouTube channel to share things that I learn along the way with you guys, so thank you for joining me on your chess journey, and let's hop into it. If you've watched any of the previous videos in this series for the lower rating levels, then you know how much I love talking about tactics. Well, this video is no different because we still need to be focusing on tactics to get to 1800 and even beyond. I mean, most games, if you think about it, if you look back at the games you've lost or even won, I guarantee a large percentage of those games were decided ultimately by tactical blunders. One of the easiest ways to improve your tactical vision is by solving a lot, and I mean a lot, of chess puzzles. Now, you don't need to be doing this all day, every day, and you shouldn't treat this as your only form of chess training, but it shouldn't be left by the side, right? You should still practice puzzles, still do them as a warm-up before your games, do some Puzzle Rush survival mode so that you can get as far as you can, and really take your time and work on your calculation and trying to see these tactical patterns. The more you do this, the sharper you will become, and the less you will blunder these one-move tactical mistakes in your own games. And that alone is already going to get you well on your way to reaching 1800 ELO, because players under that rating level are still making plenty and plenty of blunders, even above, but it just is less common, but it still appears. Aside from Puzzle Rush, you can also solve individual puzzles, rated ones, or if you have a puzzle book, then you can open that up and set up the position maybe on a physical board and really take your time looking at it. And also, if you're solving a puzzle online, don't start making the first few moves until you've seen the entire sequence. If you think, oh, this move is probably the obvious check, let me just play that and see what happens after. No, that's not solving the puzzle. That is just you making a move by guessing. Instead, you want to actually see what is my opponent going to do in response to this move, and calculate a few moves and see, does it result in you winning a very large amount of material or maybe checkmate, and try to see different variations in there, not just going for what appears to be obvious. Being able to maybe study a position for a few minutes and set it up on a physical board without looking at the original position, that's a great thing to practice too. It'll improve your vision during the game, your whole board vision so you don't tunnel in on one specific section of it, and also your memory in general, which is going to help you, and my hair agrees. The last thing I would recommend for tactics here is now we probably have a solid understanding of the basics. We can get through the first 10 or 15 puzzles on Puzzle Rush pretty easily. So what I want you to do now is actually, when you get puzzles wrong or when you make tactical blunders in your games, I want you to record those. I want you to write them down in a journal or a spreadsheet or a document, wherever, and write them down and see if you notice patterns that you are consistently missing, and then you can really focus in on that, maybe solve puzzles dedicated to that specific pattern, and it's a great way to hold yourself accountable and really work on the things that actually need work. Stepping away from tactics a little bit, let's get into strategy and positional chess, which is actually pretty exciting. It might seem boring at first, but it's actually a wide ocean of things to explore. So let's hop into that here. In order to climb up to 1800, we need to start developing the skill of evaluating a position. So you look at the position that you have on the board coming out of the opening, which you probably feel pretty comfortable coming out of the opening in a decent position at this point, and you look at it and you evaluate who is better and maybe what the plans are for both sides. This is more than just one move like, oh, if I move my knight here, I attack their queen, right? It's more overall evaluation. So you want to look at things like king safety. Whose king is safer? You want to look at material. Is anyone up material or down? Well, that's going to influence the plans, right? If you're up a ton of material, maybe you want to simplify down into an endgame where you're going to win up a piece. You also want to look at space. Who has more space? How would the plans change according to that? If you have less space, then you might want to trade some pieces so that you feel a bit less cramped. And if you have more space and control of the center, then maybe you want to start going for an attack and not trade a bunch of pieces because you want to build up your initiative and throw everything but the kitchen sink at your opponent's king. You may also want to look at piece activity in general. You can decide if your bishop is completely hemmed in by your pawns, then probably not a great bishop. It might be good if you can trade that off. But if you have some really active bishops on an open board and they're pointed directly at the opponent's king, oh boy, yeah, those bishops are more like 5-point bishops, especially compared to your opponent's rook, which is sitting on a8 and hasn't moved for 30 moves in the entire game. So I highly recommend looking up some videos on how to evaluate a chess position and maybe getting some courses or doing some free lessons on whatever website you choose for how to evaluate the position, look at piece activity, maybe positional sacrifices is pretty cool, like a clearance sacrifice to get your knight into the center of the board and create threats. Things like this are really exciting, so start diving into them. Practicing tactics and solving puzzles and learning positional concepts is great, and you definitely need to be doing that. But it's kind of pointless if you don't actually apply them in your own games and use the knowledge that you have been acquiring. This is why when you're playing a game, you need to actively think about things that maybe you're not used to. Maybe when you're playing a game, if you recently learned what an isolated queen's pawn is and what the plans may be for the one who has it or the one who is playing against it, then maybe you start to think, how can I create an isolated queen's pawn in this position so I can try it out? That could be fun. And then when you get it, then you start to think, okay, well now I see I have some space around my pawn. I can quickly get my pieces over to the king side and attack my opponent, but I also don't want them to blockade my pawn or maybe trade too many pieces so that it becomes a weakness, right? You also, of course, want to practice calculating and visualizing during the game, maybe more than you're used to. Try to think every move, okay, if I move here, what is my opponent going to do? Never make a move without asking that question. You're never going to say, I'm going to play knight g5 without wondering if your opponent can just play h6 and kick you away with no big deal, right? So you want to actually think, if I play this move, what is my opponent going to do? And do I have a good response to that? And maybe do that one or two more times so you start to see a few moves. And another note to add here, in order to climb up to 1800, it can really be helpful to, again, journal about your game analysis. So instead of just writing down tactical patterns that you've been missing, start writing down other strategic things. Like, I played this opening, it led to this type of position, did I win or lose, and what was the main reason, what's one thing I can improve upon, and what's one thing I did well. If you just journal that, I mean, that takes, what, a few minutes after the game analysis? Just do that and you log it, and then every once in a while you can come back to it and see, are there patterns here? Am I constantly losing in this type of position? Am I constantly doing this thing poorly? Then you know where to direct your training and your focus, and that's going to do wonders for your chess improvement. And at this playing strength, you're probably at the stage where you are encountering more endgames than you used to, right? When you're a more beginner player, usually the game gets decided by blundering a queen and then, you get checkmated a few moves later, or all the pieces get vacuumed up or something like that. But around this strength, you're not blundering as much like that, so you're approaching more typical endgame positions, maybe a rook endgame, maybe knight and bishop, something like that. So it's really good here to start learning some theoretical endgames along with general endgame principles. You probably know you should be activating your king, pushing your pawns, and creating pass pawns to create a queen, and things like that. Maybe also being familiar with the fact that rooks need to be active, ideally behind pass pawns, not trapped in front of them. And if you have to sacrifice a pawn for activity, then you might need to do that to avoid passive defense. You also need to be familiar with king and pawn endgames, no way around it. You need to know opposition, you need to know the rule of the square, flank pawn versus non-flank pawn, when it's a win, when it's a draw in king and pawn. You should also become familiar with good knight versus bad bishop. The bishop is going to be really good at zooming around the board and stopping pawns on either side, whereas the knight is really going to struggle to take care of that. But if everything's just on one side of the board and it's fairly closed up, then the bishop may be pointless, especially if your pawns are not on that bishop's color, and your knight can just hop around and get in and eat all the pawns. There are plenty of free videos online to learn endgames like this. There's also paid courses, and you can also go on chess.com and do a lesson a day on endgames. You can practice against a computer, set up the position, and play a king and pawn endgame against the computer. You can also do other types of endgames, maybe knight and bishop, maybe rooks, and you can learn these endgames and practice them so that if they come up in your own game, you'll know if you can win or draw that game. In my previous videos, I very much leaned on the idea of not memorizing opening moves and learning more about the concepts and ideas behind them and following good opening chess principles to build good habits, especially at lower rating levels. But in order to climb from 14 to 1800, we may start to have to memorize some more opening variations, because our opponents will probably have some traps and tricks set up on their end, so we need to know our openings fairly well to navigate that opening stage. You should be familiar with the main lines, the different variations, whether it be the advance, the exchange, the classical, whatever, and know the plans for both sides in those variations, and be able to recite a few of them from memory. This is also great. It's a fun exercise to do it in your head. If you can think, okay, well, the Caro-Kann, e4, c6, d4, d5, then I like to play c5. White usually responds with c3, sometimes, and then I can play knight c6, adding more pressure to the d4 pawn. White can play knight f3, and then we can trade in the center to weaken up the d4 pawn, and then my bishop can go out to g4, pinning the knight, further weakening the pawn on d4, and then after white unpins maybe bishop e2, I can play e6, solidify my pawn chain, start to study these variations, learn the ideas, and win some good games there by getting good positions out of the opening. Alright, so we've covered a lot of the main pillars for chess improvement to reach 1800. We talked about tactics, we talked about middle game strategy, positional chess, endgames, how to study your openings, and if you do want to play blitz, I would do it to practice the openings that you're learning, because you're always going to get an opening in these blitz games. You're not always going to get to late middle game or end game, because the game might finish before that, either on time or via checkmate or resignation. Again, if you want to take a deeper dive into this study plan and check out some more resources and insights, then I highly recommend checking out the article on chess.com. It will be linked in the description for you. But other than that, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and have a great rest of your day.